Valley is one of the most popular city destinations inside of Acacia, being placed inside of two landlocked regions between the Rio regions, which is historical for the Mexicans, Elíseos. They will make a treaty, sign a deal with the Acacians, giving them the land as long as the San Rio people can stay there. Also giving the native tribes over 100,000 acres of land split between each other, between the Canada and the South Mexican border region. They would also give the occasion the southwest region, excluding Texas, because Texas area would dip into the Mexico Peninsula area, proving that the land of North America belongs to them. The next most populous area would be the North San River, which borders the hugest island, but due to map distortion, it looks like it's south of the country. But the truth is, it's actually west into the Pacific, more close to the Hawaiian Peninsula. San Rio Valley would turn to a bustling community of just about every race and occasion. Due to the World War II, San Rio Valley would start just a few years later than Lake Oro. Building bustling cities around Acacia would be one of the reasons Lake Oro was poor. The first years of the city was different. Older brothers was protective over their younger brothers. They had bustling communities, buildings, and jobs. They had new schools that was top ranked in the country. During the midst of the war, the Acadians would send the World War II vets to San Rio Valley, and they would take their martial arts and hand sign practice along with them. Hand signs was special to martial arts because it can key to energy. Like hand signs was a sense of nature, a connection with God, the nature and spirits. Hand signs wasn't just used for gang signs and stuff like that in the early ages. After the war, Acadians would build civic, a land that they make movies, music, and other projects on. Basically, basically a real heroic civic movie production area, which is our version of Hollywood. There was another port city made on the side of San Rio Valley and Civic, which would also starting their own form of street gangs dedicated to the Guadalupe as a cartel type of gang. The Zoma and Zoma Lupe would get off-grid territories, more going to the North San River area, besides the old original Guadalupe area. The cartel of Bomas, also known as Guadalupe, would recruit members into the home country territory of Guadalupe to arrive there like bloodline like the Guadalupe. During the midst of the war setting, the San Rio Valley community would hear about the cliques and crews of the Lake Oro area. This would inspire them to make more gangs. The Hero Nation would be one of the first gangs they hear about due to them having a console and promotion, and the YOB would be the second gang they would hear about. But they still would have their own idea of gangs, and the original gang would start from the birth of the five elements. They also wanted tough people, even girls. Through the code of society, their main obligation was murder. But Rayo, they only wanted to kill villains like the YOB gang that they heard about. Besides, they also had influence with the Hero Nation. They also liked the powers and all other type of abilities. Shinobis would be a main threat. They would make their gangs out of from the five great elements. They like Lake Oro but hate having people having these styles, so instead of them giving them the real shinobi gang, they only gave them a partial. The five sects would break off into their own gangs. The fire was the flames, which was resemble the bloods wearing red. The blue was the drips, was resemble the crips. The brown is the earth, you know what I'm saying, like underground crips and stuff like that. The yellow is lightning, which is the mafia, like Main Street Mafia Crips. And wind would stand for gangsters because the wind blows everywhere and anywhere it wants. The gangs looked at the start off cool but would end up in a very bitter rivalry. Like the mafias against the gangsters and the earth against the gangsters. While aligning is the drips and flames. Besides, the drips and flames may align with either one of the other sets through the five great nations. The mafia organization will be considered equal to the drips and flames of the organization. But all in actuality, these gangs were just a facade in a show. These wasn't the real gangs of the Shinobis, and these was once again a public image. Shinobis will also see the rise in infatuation, crime, and violence throughout their city, so they divided the plan to recruit everyone inside of a gang inside of one of the five great elements to lead them and control them. They wanted everybody that was a part of the villains to kill each other without them getting their hand dirty. The second part was them actually beefing with them and getting their hands dirty. The real symbol, the first sign was a fertility sign, meaning life or death. The light meant life. When you enter life, you enter the light. When you die, you enter the void of nothingness. Not meaning dark or hell or nothing like that, but just the dark. Like when you close your eyes and start to go to sleep, you enter the void realm of sleep. Their true sign would be known as power. It's a connection sign between all the shinobis and make sure that they will never turn against each other. The swirl in the middle was the amenity to make sure all the light would pass through the crews. The beams that spreading out is the beams spreading out to the five great elements that they control. The circle was the connection between them and the five great elements. Besides the purple meaning power. That's how much power they claim to have. Their power was considered through and throughout the whole five great nations in the city. They would name their first gang Top Village, which means top of the gangs and top of the village. They will rule everything. Through rising notoriety, they will gain popularity through Lake Oro, which they would connect with them. Which they didn't give them a five grade nation because their gang was different, but gave them the life and death symbol to build their own gang. This was strengthen Lake Oro, but at the same time throw a friction between the gangs and start a gang war between YOB and non-accepted shinobi gangs. Gangs of the five great nations would once rebel, trying to be like the masters who created the gang, would recruit gangs from the Lake Oro area and try to run a old Wild West cowboy-like gang throughout the east and the southwest. Due to the cause of violence, the five great nations would mainly envy the original shinobi gang and want to go to war with them, making the Southwest one of the most lawless places even though they couldn't get to the shinobi gangs. A lot of people died during those eras, which would eventually make the Old West disband their gangs. But the violence of fluctuation between these crews would still grow during the modern day. The Hero Nation would be one of the main fighters in this war. They would make sure that the Old West terrorist gangs would have nowhere to go and nowhere to run. They would love the way that they dissolved their crime. During the early 1900s would be the rise of Asani community or Asian communities, also the rise of schools and good and bad schools. In the early 1900s to 1950s, the first war was between 4th Street gangsters and real-time mafia, which they would use their Lake Oro connection with the YOBs to get a lot of guns and artillery, where the 1950s gunfire would rise. The early ages they would only lose like 8 members during a few years of time span, but from the 1960s to the 90s they would lose like 50 and 20 people. This would lead to another gang that would be known as Tokyo Gang, which is a Sunny Islander word. TGs were violent and sometimes used swords to kill people. Made in the 1980s, they would start a whole new style of gangbanging would check homies up and make sure that violence would get promoted through the hoods. During the 90s, we had the biggest effects to these codes between murders, violence, and crimes. Everybody had a problem with somebody for some reason. These gangs, some people just looked on the outside looking in, because the earlier gangs was actually more cooler, but these new gangs was more fighters, killers, and murderers. Girls was known as shiesty and would use their size for a reason to jump dudes. The Great Shinobi Nation, being satisfied with this, was connect with other states with starting gangs, starting by giving them the life and death sign. The early 2000s would start a fluctuation of new gangs and new cities, new states and stuff like that. But the treaty between the occasions, they would make a treaty with the gang members as long as they stayed aligned to their real. They would look past the gangs, act like they didn't know. Even being a fake school kid wasn't safe. They was beating them like they was gang members so they could join gangs and act like they regular self. The codes between life and death also got out between the shinobis, between a new gang and new members. To combat the change in game's nature, the Civic will allow game members to make music videos and movies for them. They even gave them a own indie company. Starting with more friendly game titles like Hero Nation versus the Wicked Old West games. This concludes San Rio Valley history of the modern time. They use this symbol as a connection with their Shirama, first woman, first man of Africa, West Africa, man.